hospital stood at the edge of town like a forgotten thought. Cracked windows, ivy strangling its brick walls, and a rusted sign that still read Blackwood State Hospital. No one had stepped inside Blackwood State Hospital in nearly 30 years, except Daniel Mercer. Daniel didn't believe in ghost stories. As a freelance photographer obsessed with abandoned places, he had explored factories, prisons, and forgotten schools. But nothing unsettled him like this place. The air inside felt thick, damp with rot, and something metallic, like dried blood. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating peeling paint and wheelchairs, overturned in hallways that seemed to stretch longer than the building's exterior allowed. Patient files littered the floor of the records room. Names repeated themselves in frantic handwriting. Subject hears knocking in walls. Subject claims the building breathes. Subject insists something lives beneath Ward C. Daniel smirked. Myths hysteria, he thought. Old psychiatric practices had been cruel. Of course the patients imagined monsters. Then he heard it. A knock, slow, deliberate, from inside the wall beside him. He froze. The knock came again, 3 times. Then silence. Plumbing, he whispered to himself, though there were no pipes running through that section of plaster. He pressed his ear against the wall. Something shifted on the other side. Not scratching. Not rats. It sounded like fingers dragging across stone. He stepped back, heart thudding. The corridor lights flickered on for a split second, though the building had no electricity. In that flash, he saw figures standing at the end of the hallway. Patients, pale gowns, heads tilted at impossible angles. When darkness swallowed them again, they were gone. Daniel's breathing quickened. He turned to leave, but the hallway had changed. The exit door was no longer behind him. Instead, a heavy metal door marked Ward C stood where freedom had been. The paint was fresh, wet, dripping. The knocking returned, louder now, echoing from every direction. The walls pulsed subtly, as if inhaling, exhaling. A voice seeped through the cracks, layered and overlapping, hundreds speaking as one. You came back. Daniel staggered backward. I've never been here before. The lights flickered again. This time the hallway was lined with restraints bolted to the walls. Leather straps dangled, swaying though there was no wind. Shadows crawled across the ceiling like veins spreading through skin. A memory surfaced, one he didn't recognize as his own. A room, needles, screaming, doctors whispering about containment. His hands began to shake. They weren't his hands, they were thinner, bruised. A hospital bracelet tightened around his wrist. Patient name, Daniel Mercer. Admitted October 12th, 1978. Diagnosis, acute paranoid psychosis. Status, transferred to Ward C. No, he whispered, that's not possible. The metal door creaked open. Inside was not a room, but a stairwell descending into darkness that seemed to swallow the beam of his flashlight whole. The knocking now came from below, slow, patient, waiting. The voice returned, softer now. You never left. The hallway behind him dissolved into crumbling brick, ceiling shut. The figures in gowns appeared again, closer this time, their hollow eyes fixed on him with something like pity. One raised a trembling finger and pointed down the stairs. Daniel felt his legs move without permission. Step by step, he descended. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing against his chest until breathing felt optional. At the bottom was a small chamber with padded walls, except the padding was torn open, revealing not foam but writhing darkness underneath. nest of living shadows. In the center stood a single chair with restraints. Fresh restraints. The knocking stopped. Silence rang in his ears. The layered voice spoke one final time, now from inside his skull. Treatment resumes. The restraints snapped shut around his wrists and ankles, though no hands touched him. The flashlight rolled across the floor and went out. Days later, a group of urban explorers wandered into Blackwood State Hospital. They found no sign of Daniel Mercer. But in Ward C, beneath decades of dust, they discovered a new patient file resting neatly on a desk. The ink was still wet. Subject returned voluntarily. Condition deteriorating. Reports hearing knocking in the walls. And from somewhere deep below the floorboards, faint but unmistakable, came 3 slow knocks. The explorers laughed at first. Old buildings made noises. Wood contracted. Pipes shifted. Wind found its way into bones of brick and iron. Probably animals, one of them muttered, nudging the dusty file with his shoe. The paper was fresh. Too fresh. The ink smeared slightly when he touched Daniel Mercer's name. Then came the 4th knock, not from below, from behind them. They turned in unison. The hallway stretched long and bare, moonlight leaking through shattered windows. Nothing moved. One of them, a girl named Maris, lifted her camera. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. 3 knocks answered her, this time from inside the walls to her left. The plaster trembled. A hairline crack split upward like a jagged smile. "Okay," said Tom, forcing a grin. "Not funny." The crack widened. From within, something pressed outward. Not a hand exactly. More like the suggestion of one. A distortion in the wall, as if the building were made of skin instead of brick. Maris backed away, her breath fogging in the sudden cold. "We should go." The hallway lights flickered on for half a second. In that white flash, they saw doors lining the corridor that hadn't been there before. Each door bore a name carved into metal plates. Maris stepped closer to one and felt her stomach drop. The plate read, "Maris Hale." Beneath it, "Ward C." "That's not possible," she said. Tom turned slowly. His own name gleamed on the door behind him. One by one, they realized every door bore their names. The 5th knock echoed, not from walls, not from floors, but from inside their chests. Tom gasped and clutched at his shirt. His heart wasn't beating normally anymore. It was knocking, slow, deliberate, in rhythm with the building. Boom, boom, boom. The corridor breathed inward, walls tightening subtly, the ceiling lowering by inches. The air thickened with the metallic scent Daniel had noticed before. Maris stumbled backward into her door. It swung open at her touch. Inside was a small observation room, a metal chair bolted to the floor, leather restraints hanging open, a mirror covering one entire wall. She saw her reflection, and behind it, figures standing in the mirrored room, pale gowns, heads tilted, watching. "It's not real," she whispered. The reflection of herself smiled. She hadn't. The door slammed shut behind her. In the hallway, Tom pounded on her door, shouting her name. The wood absorbed the sound like flesh swallowing a blade. A 6th knock shook the building. Plaster rained from the ceiling. The other explorers were gone. Their doors stood open now, dark interiors yawning like throats. Tom staggered backward as the corridor stretched impossibly long, perspective bending until the far end disappeared into blackness. The intercom crackled overhead, though no wires connected it to anything. A voice filtered through, chorus Daniel had heard. New admissions processed, treatment resumes. Maris screamed from inside her room. Tom turned just in time to see her reflection in the observation window. Not restrained, but standing calmly beside the figures in gowns. Watching him, her real body thrashed in the chair, straps tightening around her wrists. The reflection raised a finger to its lips. Silence. The seventh knock came from the floor beneath Tom's feet. The tiles split open, revealing not concrete, but a dark stairwell descending into a place that swallowed light whole. Cold air rushed upward, carrying whispers. Names, so many names. Tom tried to run. The hallway folded in on itself, looping impossibly. Every turn led back to the stairwell. The knocking stopped. The silence was worse. Then gently, kindly, the voice spoke again. You heard it too. That's why you came. Tom felt a memory that wasn't his seep into his mind. White coats, syringes, padded rooms. The sense of being watched, of something beneath the building, not trapped, but waiting, feeding. The hospital wasn't haunted. It was hungry. It didn't keep patients inside. It absorbed them. Their fears, their delusions, their fractured thoughts became mortar between its bricks. Their paranoia strengthened its walls. Their terror fed whatever lived beneath ward. See, Maris's screams faded into soft knocking, in rhythm. Tom stepped backward toward the stairwell despite himself. His heart answered the building's pulse. Boom, boom, boom. Down below, something shifted, not moving through space, but moving closer in awareness, as if it had noticed him specifically. The final thing Tom saw before the darkness swallowed him was the rusted sign outside the hospital, visible through a cracked window. The name had changed. It no longer read Blackwood State Hospital. The peeling letters now formed new words. Blackwood State Home, and beneath it, freshly painted in red, now accepting. Far below the earth, in a chamber lined with torn padding and breathing walls, a new file slid neatly onto a desk that no human hand touched. Tom Rivera. Status admitted. Condition improving. From the surface, the building fell silent once more. Empty, abandoned, waiting for the next curious soul to hear the knocking and mistake it for plumbing. Morning came gently to the edge of town. Sunlight spilled across broken windows, warming the rotting brick of Blackwood State Home as if it were nothing more than an abandoned relic. Birds nested in the gutters. Weeds split the pavement. From the outside, it was still and ordinary. Inside, something shifted in its sleep. Deep beneath Ward C, where the stairwell ended in lightless stone, the chamber widened. The torn padding on the walls flexed slowly, revealing veins of darkness pulsing underneath. The files on the metal desk rearranged themselves with a dry whisper of paper. Hundreds of names, thousands, some dating back a century, some written only hours ago. The newest file opened on its own. Tom Rivera, Maris Hale, Daniel Mercer. Their photographs blinked. Not images, windows. Behind each picture, a pair of eyes moved, watching, learning. Above, in what had once been the lobby, dust stirred in a thin spiral. Footprints formed one after another across the grime, though no feet pressed into it. A reception bell appeared on the counter, polished, gleaming. It rang once. Soft, polite. In town, a woman named Eleanor Price paused mid-step while walking her dog. She frowned, glancing toward the distant hospital. "Did you hear that?" she murmured, though the street was empty. 3 faint knocks echoed somewhere. She woke with a metallic taste in her mouth and a deep certainty that she had forgotten something important. The next morning, a flyer appeared on the town bulletin board. No one saw who pinned it there. Blackwood State Home reopened, now accepting patients, personalized treatment, discreet admissions. The paper looked old and new at the same time. The ink shimmered faintly as though still wet. Over the following weeks, subtle changes crept through the town. People reported knocking in their homes, always 3 times, always from inside the walls. Pets refused to enter certain rooms. Radios crackled with static that almost sounded like whispering. A few residents began sleepwalking. They were found standing on the sidewalk at night, facing the distant silhouette of the hospital with blank expressions. One by one, they began to disappear. Not dramatically, not violently. They simply packed small bags and left notes for family members. Voluntary admission, the note said in identical handwriting. I need treatment. No cars were seen driving up the hill. No lights flickered on in the building. Yet the files below multiplied. The chamber beneath Ward C expanded again, its breathing deeper now, steadier. The darkness within it had texture, layered thoughts, fractured memories, fears braided together into something aware. It had learned how to reach beyond brick. It no longer needed visitors to step inside. It could knock from anywhere. In Eleanor's house, the knocking grew louder each night. She pressed her ear to the living room wall, trembling. What do you want? She whispered. The wall felt warm. A gentle voice answered, layered and familiar. Only to make you well. The plaster split open softly, like lips parting. Beyond it was not wiring or insulation, but a softly lit corridor lined with doors. Her name gleamed from one of them. Eleanor stepped forward without resistance. The wall sealed behind her seamlessly. Her dog barked at empty space until its voice gave out. By the end of the month, the town felt quieter, less crowded. Real estate signs appeared on lawns. Streets emptied. Those who remained avoided looking toward the hill. But sometimes, late at night, they saw lights glowing faintly in the hospital windows, warm and welcoming. The rusted sign out front shed its last flakes of decay. The letters straightened. Fresh paint gleamed. Blackwood State Home now stood pristine, as if newly built. The doors at its entrance slowly creaked open. Inside the lobby, the reception bell rang again, and from every house in town, from every apartment wall and basement foundation, from the hollow spaces between beams and bricks, came the answer. 3 slow knocks. The building no longer waited for the curious. It no longer relied on explorers or thrill seekers. It had become part of the town's bones, part of its wiring, part of its dreams. Beneath Ward C, in the expanding dark, the layered voice spoke not to a single patient, but to all of them. Capacity increasing. The walls inhaled. The town exhaled. And somewhere, far beyond the edge of that fading map dot, another abandoned hospital felt something stir within its own foundation. A faint echo traveling through soil and stone. A blueprint being shared in the dark. 3 knocks sounded in its empty halls for the very first time. The echo did not fade. It traveled through soil, through sewer lines, through forgotten tunnels that once carried steam and whispers beneath cities. The second hospital stood hundreds of miles away, condemned after a fire that had officially killed 12 patients and quietly misplaced 19. sealed by rust. The third awakened something patient in its walls. Back in Blackwood, the town map at City Hall changed overnight. Streets subtly rerouted, property lines shifted by inches. When the mayor compared it to archived records, he felt a flicker of unease. An extra block now existed at the edge of town. A cul-de-sac that ended not in forest, but at a long, familiar driveway leading up a hill. No one recalled building it. Yet tire marks scarred the asphalt as though it had been used for years. That evening, a town meeting was called. Fewer than a dozen residents attended. They spoke in hushed tones about the disappearances, about the knocking, about dreams of checkered floors and observation windows. As they argued, the fluorescent lights above them hummed in a low, arrhythmic pulse. Then they synchronized. Boom, boom, boom. Every light flickered in perfect rhythm. A man near the back of the room stood abruptly. His expression softened into something peaceful. "It's not hurting anyone," he said gently. "It's helping." The others stared. His smile widened slightly, not malicious, reassuring. "We were always unwell. It's giving us structure." The doors to the meeting hall locked with a soft click. Outside, the streetlights blinked out one by one, forming a slow procession leading toward the hill. Inside Blackwood State Home, the lobby expanded again. The ceiling stretched higher. The tile floor polished itself. Wheelchairs lined the walls, though no hands pushed them. The reception desk grew longer to accommodate a steady increase in files sliding into place. The bell rang intermittently now, as if greeting arrivals no human eye could see. Beneath Ward C, the chamber no longer resembled a room. It resembled a heart, vast, layered. The torn padding had peeled away entirely, revealing a living architecture of shadow and memory. Faces surfaced briefly in its surface like impressions beneath skin. Daniel, Maris, Tom, Eleanor. Their expressions no longer twisted in fear. They looked calm, integrated, their thoughts braided into the greater mass. The entity had learned efficiency. It no longer required physical walls to open. It could unfold inside a person instead. Across the country, reports began to surface online. Threads discussing identical dreams, identical knocking, users describing hospitals they had never visited, with corridors that bent incorrectly and doors engraved with their own names. The posts were dismissed as mass suggestion, urban legend, viral horror, until the authors of those posts stopped responding entirely. In the second abandoned hospital, fresh paint now coated the doors. Its basement stairwell descended deeper than architectural plans allowed. 3 new files rested on a desk that had not existed before. Capacity increasing. The phrase replicated itself like a diagnosis spreading through ink. Back in Blackwood, the last town resident tried to leave. She packed her car at dawn, engine trembling as she sped down the only road out. The trees along the highway leaned inward slightly, branches intertwining overhead until daylight thinned to a gray tunnel. Her GPS recalculated. Recalculating. The road curved gently, then sharply, then upward. When the trees parted, she found herself at the base of the hill again. Daniel's back. That's what Daniel kept telling himself as the trees thickened and the last hint of gravel turned into a narrow ribbon of dirt. The GPS had lost signal 10 minutes ago, his phone now a blank, unhelpful rectangle of black glass. The only thing guiding him was the memory of a pin dropped weeks earlier. An off-grid cabin in the forests outside Asheville. A digital detox, the listing had promised. A place to disconnect. A place to breathe. He hadn't told anyone he was coming. The forest swallowed sound. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just the low growl of his car engine as it crept forward. Then the trees parted. The cabin stood in a clearing like it had been placed there rather than built. Dark wood, steep roof, narrow windows reflecting nothing. No porch light, no path. Just structure and shadow. Daniel killed the engine. The silence that followed felt alive, pressing against his ears until they rang. He stepped out. The air smelled damp and old, like turned soil, and something faintly metallic beneath it. The door to the cabin was already open, not wide, just enough to suggest invitation or warning. Hello. His voice fell flat, swallowed instantly. He approached slowly, boots crunching over brittle leaves. The door creaked when he pushed it further. Inside, the cabin was neat, too neat. A small wooden table, 2 chairs, a cast iron stove, a narrow staircase leading upward. A lantern sat on the table, already filled with oil. A matchbox beside it. He felt that first ripple of unease then. The listing had said self-check-in. Key under the mat. But there had been no mat and no key. The door hadn't been locked. Daniel stepped fully inside. The door swung shut behind him with a sharp final click. He spun around. The handle refused to turn. He pulled harder. Nothing. The wood didn't budge. His pulse climbed. Okay, he muttered to himself. Okay. Old cabins swell in humidity. That's all. He would open a window. There were 4 narrow windows along the walls. Each one showed only darkness, though it was barely past 6 in the evening. That wasn't possible. It had been light outside moments ago. He rushed to the nearest window and wiped his sleeve across the glass. His reflection stared back, pale, eyes wide. But behind him, in the reflection only, something moved. He froze. Slowly he turned around. The room was empty. He looked back at the window. Nothing now, just himself. His breathing sounded too loud. He laughed weakly. You're tired. Long drive. He lit the lantern. Warm light pushed back the shadows, but not far. The corners of the cabin remained thick with darkness, like the light refused to touch them. That's when he saw it. Scratches on the inside of the door. Long, frantic gouges in the wood. At shoulder height and lower. And higher. As if multiple hands had clawed at it. From inside, a cold understanding settled into him. This wasn't about keeping something out. The staircase creaked. He jerked his head upward. The sound had come from above. Slow, deliberate. A single step, then another. Something was moving in the loft. Hello, he called again, voice breaking. The steps stopped. Silence pressed in again, heavier now. He grabbed the lantern and moved toward the stairs, despite every instinct screaming at him not to. enormous weight. The air grew colder as he climbed. At the top was a small loft space with a bed and a single rocking chair facing the wall. The chair was moving, back and forth, back and forth. Slowly, there was no one in it. He stepped into the loft. The rocking stopped. The silence roared. Then, from directly behind him, a whisper brushed his ear. You weren't invited. Daniel spun, nearly dropping the lantern. No one. But the ladder. No, not a ladder anymore. The staircase was gone. In its place was a smooth wooden wall. He stumbled backward. The walls of the loft seemed closer now. The ceiling lower. The air thinner. This isn't real, he whispered. I'm dreaming. The rocking chair began to move again, this time faster. The wall in front of it darkened, the wood grain twisting, bending, reshaping into something almost like a face. Knots forming eyes, a crack stretching into a mouth. It opened, and inside was only blackness. A smell poured out. Wet earth, decay, iron. The forest floor, grave soil. Hands emerged first, pale, too long. Fingers bending the wrong direction. They gripped the edges of the wooden mouth and pulled. A body followed, unfolding like it had been folded wrong. Its skin looked like bark stretched too tight over bone. Its eyes were hollow pits, leaking darkness instead of tears. You came alone, it said, though its mouth didn't move. The voice came from the walls, from the floor, from inside Daniel's skull. That makes it easier. He stumbled back until he hit the far wall. It was soft, not wood, soft and yielding like damp soil. The creature tilted its head, joints cracking like snapping twigs. The cabin keeps what the forest chooses. The floor shifted beneath Daniel's feet. The planks split, revealing packed dirt underneath. The lantern flickered violently. Shapes moved below the cracks. Hands, dozens of them, scratching upward. He ran toward where the stairs had been, pounding against the wall. Let me out. The wall rippled under his fists. For a moment, he saw faces pushing outward from within the wood, screaming silently. The creature stepped closer, movements jerky, unnatural. They all asked that. The hands burst through the floorboards, grabbing his ankles. He kicked, screaming, but more hands seized his wrists, his arms, his waist. They were cold and damp, nails packed with soil. They dragged him downward. The last thing he saw before the dirt swallowed him was the creature's hollow eyes widening in something like satisfaction. Then darkness, absolute. Silence returned to the forest clearing. Outside, the cabin looked undisturbed. Peaceful even. The door creaked open slowly. The evening light revealed nothing unusual inside. No scratches on a door. No split floorboards. No disturbed dirt. Just the small wooden table. 2 chairs, a lantern, and a matchbox. Waiting. An hour later, headlights appeared at the edge of the clearing. A woman stepped out of her car, glancing at her phone. Finally, she muttered. No signal. She approached the cabin, frowning slightly. Weird, she whispered. The door's already open. The forest swallowed swallowed the sound of it closing behind her. The door shut with the same final click. Emily stood still for a moment, hand resting on the handle, waiting for her eyes to adjust. "Hello," she called softly, peering into the dim interior. The cabin looked staged, almost picturesque. A wooden table, 2 chairs, a cast iron stove, a lantern and a matchbox placed neatly in the center like props. The air felt dense, humid, and faintly metallic. She stepped inside anyway. The door sealed behind her with a low thud. She turned the handle casually at first, then harder. It didn't move. "You've got to be kidding me." She exhaled sharply, annoyed rather than afraid. Old wood, swelling hinges. She'd seen worse. She set her bag down and moved toward the windows. Outside should have been early evening, the last of the light filtering through the trees. Instead, the glass reflected only darkness. Not the kind that comes with nightfall. This was depthless, endless black. No trees, no sky, no clearing, just void. Her reflection looked wrong. It lagged a fraction of a second behind her movements. When she lifted her hand, the reflection followed too slowly. When she blinked, it didn't blink at all. Emily stepped back, heart beginning to thud. "Okay," she whispered, her voice thinner now. She grabbed the lantern and struck a match. The flame flared to life, pushing shadows outward. But the shadows didn't behave. They stretched too long, climbing the walls like reaching fingers. They overlapped in ways that made no sense, and there were more of them than there should have been. She counted quickly. Table, chairs, herself. That made 4. There were at least 7 shadows on the walls. The staircase creaked overhead. She froze. "Daniel," she called instinctively, though she hadn't expected anyone to be here. The name had slipped from her mouth without permission. She didn't know any Daniel. The air shifted. A soft, dragging sound moved across the loft floor. Then silence. Emily swallowed hard. "I'm not alone," she murmured. The words didn't feel like fear. They felt like recognition. She climbed the stairs slowly, lantern trembling in her grip. Each step groaned like something in pain. The loft came into view. A narrow bed, a rocking chair facing the wall. It was still. She stepped fully into the space. The temperature dropped instantly. Her breath fogged faintly in front of her. The wall the chair faced looked warped, the grain spiraling unnaturally. "This place," she whispered. The rocking chair moved, just once. A slow backward tilt, then forward. Emily's chest tightened. "No," she breathed. The chair began rocking steadily, back and forth, back and forth. She circled slowly, trying to see if something pushed it. Nothing. When she reached the front of the chair, she stopped cold. It wasn't empty. A faint indentation pressed into the seat cushion, as if someone invisible sat there. The air above it shimmered. The impression deepened. The chair creaked louder, faster. Then it stopped abruptly. The indentation remained, and 2 faint handprints appeared on the armrests, pressing downward. "You shouldn't have come," a voice said gently. Not from the walls, not from the air, from the chair itself. Emily stumbled back. "Who's there?" The lantern flickered violently. The warped wall behind the chair split down the center with a splintering crack. Darkness bled from the opening like liquid shadow. And from within, something unfolded. It was tall, too tall for the loft ceiling. Its spine bent sideways at an impossible angle to fit the space. Limbs elongated and retracted like jointed branches. Its skin resembled wood grain, bark-like ridges layered over sinew. Its face had no clear features, just shifting grooves and knots that rearranged constantly. But its eyes were there, two hollow depressions that absorbed the lantern light instead of reflecting it. The forest marked him, it whispered. Emily's heart pounded violently. Marked who? The creature tilted its head slowly. The one before you. A flash of earth, hands reaching upward. A man's scream swallowed by soil. The images slammed into her mind with brutal clarity. Daniel. She saw his face though she had never met him. She felt his panic, his final breath. She staggered, clutching her head. Stop. The creature stepped forward. The floor beneath it softened, boards darkening into damp soil. You follow the call, it murmured. You always do. I don't know what you're talking about, she gasped. But something inside her did. She had seen the listing 3 times before booking it. Each time she had closed the tab. Each time it had reappeared days later. No reviews, no host information. Just coordinates and the words, "Come alone." The creature's body crackled like burning wood. The cabin is not wood, it said. It is memory. It is hunger. The walls pulsed faintly. The grain shifted like muscle beneath skin. Emily ran for the stairs. They were gone. In their place was a seamless wall of wood. She pounded on it. "Let me out," the cabin answered. The walls throbbed once, deeply like a heartbeat. The windows darkened further until even her reflection vanished. The only light left was the lantern, and it was dimming. The floor split open with a sharp crack. Packed soil pushed upward, swallowing the boards. Hands emerged, dozens, pale, mud-slicked, clawing blindly. She screamed and jumped back, but the loft was shrinking. The ceiling pressed lower. The walls crept inward. The creature's hollow eyes widened slightly. "The forest does not waste," it said. "It recycles." The hands seized her ankles. She kicked wildly, knocking the lantern over. Its flames spilled across the floorboards. But instead of igniting, the wood absorbed it. The fire sank into the surface and vanished. "No," she shrieked. More hands grabbed her wrists, her waist. Cold fingers dug into her skin. She felt herself being dragged downward as the soil opened like a mouth. "You are not first," the creature whispered. "You will not be last." The dirt swallowed her scream. The loft sealed, the walls smoothed, the rocking chair stilled. Silence returned. Outside, the clearing looked peaceful beneath a moonless sky. The cabin stood unchanged, quiet, waiting. Minutes passed, then hours. The forest exhaled softly. hiker several miles away paused, frowning at his phone. A new listing had appeared on a rental app. Secluded woodland cabin. Perfect escape. No reviews yet. He smiled slightly. Why not? He murmured. Deep in the forest, beneath layers of packed soil under the cabin floor, two shapes stirred in the dark. Not alive. Not dead. Something in between. Their outlines pressed faintly upward against the dirt ceiling above them. Listening. Waiting. And far above, in the loft, the rocking chair moved once. Just once. Back and forth. The hiker's name was Marcus Hale. He told himself the trip was spontaneous, healthy, necessary. After the divorce, after selling the house, after realizing that silence in an apartment felt heavier than silence in the woods, he had needed somewhere remote, somewhere untouched. The listing had appeared at exactly the right time. Secluded woodland cabin. No neighbors, no signal, total privacy. The photos were minimal, just the exterior. A warm lantern glow in one window, tall trees encircling the clearing. Something about it felt familiar, though he couldn't place why. He booked it without hesitation. 3 days later, he stood at the edge of the clearing, backpack slung over one shoulder. The cabin looked exactly like the photos. Dark wood, steep roof, narrow windows, peaceful, still. Perfect, Marcus muttered. The air felt cooler inside the clearing, but he welcomed it. He liked cold. Cold felt clean. The door was slightly ajar. He frowned but assumed the host had prepared it. Hello, he called casually as he stepped inside. The interior smelled faintly of earth. Not unpleasant, just damp, like after rainfall. The door closed behind him with a soft but definitive click. He didn't notice. He set the pack down and walked around, inspecting the place. Table, 2 chairs, cast iron stove, lantern and matchbox. Minimalist, he chuckled. He reached for the lantern, struck a match, and lit it. The flame caught quickly, steady and bright. The light spread across the room, and for just a moment, he thought he saw faint lines on the floor. Circular impressions in the wood, like something heavy had been dragged repeatedly across it. When he leaned closer, they were gone. The staircase creaked. He looked up, mildly annoyed. Probably settling, he said aloud. His voice sounded slightly distorted, as if the room swallowed certain syllables. He climbed the stairs slowly. The loft appeared small but comfortable. A narrow bed, a rocking chair facing the wall. He rolled his eyes. Of course, there's a creepy chair. He stepped closer to it. The wood grain in the wall ahead looked intricate, almost hypnotic. Swirls inside swirls. Knots like eyes half-formed. He leaned in unconsciously. The patterns shifted, just slightly. He blinked. They were normal again. He reached out and touched the wall. It felt warmer than it should have. Not like wood, like skin left in the sun. He jerked his hand back. The rocking chair creaked behind him. Marcus turned slowly. The chair was moving, back and forth. Slow, steady. No wind, no draft. Okay, he whispered, a tremor finally entering his voice. The lantern flame flickered violently. The shadows on the wall multiplied. They stretched shadow stood taller than the others, and it wasn't attached to him. Marcus backed away until his calves hit the bed. "Who's here?" he demanded. The rocking stopped. Silence pressed in from all sides. Then the wall in front of him split open with a sound like cracking bone. Darkness poured out. A tall shape unfolded from within it, bending unnaturally to fit the space. Its limbs were elongated, bark-textured, its torso twisting slightly as if hung from invisible strings. Its face shifted constantly, grooves and knots rearranging into half-formed features before melting again. But its eyes remained fixed. Two hollow depressions drinking in the lantern light. Marcus couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The creature tilted its head slowly. "You carry loss," it murmured. The voice seemed to vibrate through the wood itself. Marcus shook his head. "Stay back." The floor beneath him softened. The planks darkened, grain dissolving into soil. Cold dirt pressed against the soles of his boots. "Loss feeds deep," the creature whispered. "Regret roots well." Hands burst from the floor, mud-caked, pale, desperate. They clawed at his legs. Marcus screamed and stumbled backward, but more hands emerged from the walls now, pushing through wood as if it were thin fabric. Fingers brushed his shoulders, his arms. "No, let me out," he shouted, running towards the staircase. It was gone. Only smooth wooden wall remained. The lantern fell from his grip. The flame didn't spread. It sank into the floor like water absorbed by sand. The creature stepped closer, joints cracking sharply. "The forest called you," it said. "You answered." The soil split wider. The hands seized him fully now. Wrists, ankles, waist. He thrashed violently, kicking free one leg only to have two more hands grab it. He felt fingernails digging into his skin. Cold breath against his ear. Whispers overlapping. Dozens of voices murmuring the same phrase. "Stay, stay, stay." "Please," Marcus gasped, tears blurring his vision. The creature leaned close, its hollow eyes inches from his face. "You are already part of it." The floor opened completely. Marcus was dragged downward into darkness. The last thing he saw was the creature folding itself back into the wall, the split ceiling seamlessly behind it. The soil smoothed, the wood returned. The rocking chair swayed once, then stilled. Outside, the clearing remained quiet. Birds began to sing again at the edge of the forest, though none entered it. By afternoon, the dirt road leading to the cabin looked slightly wider, more defined, as if recently traveled. On a phone somewhere miles away, the listing refreshed, now with one small change. Popular choice, booking quickly. Deep beneath the cabin floor, three shapes now pressed upward against the packed earth ceiling, listening, learning. And in the loft, barely audible, three slow knocks echoed from inside the walls.
The Last Bell. It was a cold November evening when Daniel realized he had forgotten his notebook at school. The building was already closed, but the janitor recognized him and let him in. "Be quick," the old man said. "The last bell rings soon." Daniel laughed. The last bell? School ended hours ago. The hallways were silent. Lockers stood like tall metal shadows. Every step Daniel took echoed through the building. His classroom was on the 3rd floor. When he reached it, the door creaked open slowly. Inside, the lights flickered. His notebook sat exactly where he left it, on the last desk near the window. As he grabbed it, the school bell rang. Brrrg! Daniel froze. The bell wasn't supposed to ring. Then he heard something else. Chairs scraping. He turned slowly. The desks around him were moving, inch by inch, sliding across the floor as if someone invisible was sitting down in them. Another sound followed, whispering. Soft voices filled the room. Class is starting. Daniel's heart pounded. He ran toward the door, but it slammed shut before he could reach it. The lights went out. In the darkness, he heard footsteps walking toward him, slow, heavy. Then the light flickered back on for a second, and Daniel saw them, students, dozens of pale students sitting at the desks. Their eyes were completely black. At the front of the class stood a teacher Daniel had never seen before. Her neck was twisted slightly, like it had been broken. She slowly raised a piece of chalk and wrote on the board, "Detention forever." Daniel screamed and rushed for the door. It burst open, and he ran down the hallway, the whispers chasing him. "Stay. Class isn't over." He didn't stop until he reached the entrance. Outside, the janitor was waiting. Daniel gasped, "There's something upstairs." The janitor looked at him sadly. "You heard the last bell, didn't you?" Daniel nodded. The old man whispered, "That means they marked you present." Then the school bell rang again behind them. And from the dark hallway, Daniel's name echoed in dozens of voices. "Daniel, take your seat." Daniel stood frozen outside the school gate as the voices whispered his name from the dark hallway behind him. "Daniel, take your seat." The janitor slowly closed the heavy front doors and locked them. The echo of the lock clicking sounded louder than the bell itself. "You should go home," the janitor said quietly. But Daniel couldn't move. His legs felt heavy, like something inside the school was pulling him back. "What was that?" Daniel asked, his voice shaking. The janitor looked at the building for a long moment before answering. "This school used to stay open late. Night classes, detention, extra lessons. But years ago something happened after the last bell." Daniel swallowed. "What happened?" The janitor didn't answer right away. The wind pushed dry leaves across the empty schoolyard. Finally, he spoke. One winter night, a group of students were kept in detention by a teacher who refused to let them leave until their work was perfect. The bell rang, but the teacher ignored it. The students stayed. Hours passed. Snowstorm came. Power went out. No one realized they were still inside. Daniel's stomach twisted. What happened to them? The janitor's eyes looked tired. They were found the next morning. Every student sitting at their desk, exactly like a class in session. Daniel whispered, "Dead?" The janitor nodded slowly. Frozen. The heating had stopped when the power died. Daniel looked back at the school. One classroom window on the 3rd floor flickered with light. "But I saw them." The janitor sighed. "Sometimes the bell rings again. When it does, the class returns." Daniel tried to laugh, but it came out weak. Ghost stories. Then the bell rang again. Brrrr. The sound was louder this time. The lights inside the school turned on one by one, floor by floor. First floor, second floor, third floor. Daniel's heart dropped. Silhouettes appeared in the classroom windows. Students, sitting perfectly still, all facing the front of the class. One figure stood up slowly, the twisted-neck teacher. Even from the schoolyard, Daniel could see her arm lift. She pointed directly at him. The school doors slammed open. The hallway lights flickered violently. The whisper returned, louder now. Daniel, class has started. Daniel stepped backward. No. The janitor grabbed his arm. Don't listen. Walk away. But the whisper grew stronger, like dozens of voices layered together. Late students must report. Late students must report. Daniel suddenly felt dizzy. His feet began walking toward the doors. He tried to stop, but couldn't. I can't control it, he cried. The janitor pulled harder. For a moment, Daniel stopped moving. Then the third bell rang, the loudest yet. The janitor's grip slipped. Daniel walked straight through the doors into the hallway. The doors slammed shut behind him. Darkness swallowed the entrance. Inside, the school felt different. The air was cold, colder than winter outside. Lockers rattled softly as he walked past them. His feet moved on their own toward the stairs. Step, step, step. Every floor he passed looked wrong. Classroom doors were open. Desks were full of silent students staring at empty chalkboards. None of them moved. None of them blinked. But every head slowly turned as Daniel passed. Third floor. The hallway light flickered. At the end of the corridor was his classroom. The door slowly opened by itself. Inside, the ghostly class sat exactly where he saw them before. The teacher stood at the front with chalk in her hand. The blackboard now had more words written across it. Attendance. The teacher turned her broken neck toward him. Crack, crack, crack. She smiled slowly. You are late. Daniel tried to speak, but his voice was gone. The teacher pointed to the only empty chair in the room. Take your seat. The chair slid backward across the floor, waiting for him. The other students watched silently with their black eyes. Daniel stepped forward, one step, then another, until he sat down. The chair slid forward on its own. The teacher wrote something else on the board. Class will never end. Then she turned back toward the class. Page 1. Every student slowly opened their notebooks. Daniel looked down. His notebook was already open. On the first page were the words, "Welcome to detention." Suddenly, the bell rang again, but this time, it didn't stop ringing. And outside in the empty schoolyard, the janitor stood alone staring at the dark building. He sighed quietly and whispered, "Another one marked present." Inside the classroom, Daniel finally understood the truth. The last bell wasn't the end of school. It was the beginning. And the class would continue forever. The bell kept ringing, not loud anymore, but constant, like a heartbeat echoing through the school walls. Daniel sat frozen in the desk while the other students slowly turned the pages of their notebooks at the exact same time. Flip. The sound was perfectly synchronized. The teacher's twisted neck cracked again as she faced the blackboard. Lesson 1. she said softly. Her voice sounded like chalk scraping glass. Daniel looked around. None of the students were breathing. None of them blinked. But their pencils began to move across the pages. Scratching, writing, scratching, writing. Daniel looked down at his own notebook. His hand slowly picked up the pencil without him moving it. The pencil began writing by itself. The words formed slowly. How did you die? Daniel's heart pounded. I'm not dead, he whispered. The teacher stopped writing on the board. Every pencil in the classroom stopped at the exact same moment. Slowly, every head turned toward him. The teacher smiled wider. Everyone says that at first. The lights flickered again. For a moment, Daniel saw something terrifying. The classroom changed. The desks were old and broken. Ice covered the floor. The windows were frozen shut. Snow had blown inside. The students sitting around him were no longer pale. They were blue and stiff, like frozen statues. Then the lights flickered again, and the normal ghostly classroom returned. Daniel pushed his chair back. I'm leaving. The teacher slammed the chalk onto the desk. The classroom door slammed shut again. The whispers started rising around him. No one leaves detention. No one leaves detention. No one leaves detention. The voices grew louder and louder until Daniel covered his ears. Suddenly, one student across from him lifted their hand slowly. Their arm cracked as it moved. Teacher, he doesn't understand the rules. The teacher nodded. Then we will show him. She turned toward Daniel and pointed at the blackboard again. The writing changed by itself. The chalk floated across the board, writing new words. Recess. The bell rang again. Instantly, every student stood up at the same time. Chairs slammed against the floor. Daniel stumbled backward as the classroom door creaked open. The hallway outside was darker than before. The teacher spoke again. Recess lasts 10 minutes. She looked directly into Daniel's eyes. If you're not back before the bell, you join the hallway. Daniel didn't ask what that meant. The students began walking into the hallway slowly. Their footsteps echoed like hollow wood. Daniel followed carefully behind them. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. Lockers lined both sides, but many were bent open, like something inside had tried to escape. One locker door suddenly slammed shut by itself. Daniel jumped. A student beside him whispered without moving their mouth. They're still in there. Daniel stepped away quickly. At the end of the hallway was a staircase leading down to the gym. The students walked toward it. Daniel hesitated, then followed. The gym doors opened slowly. Inside was darkness, except for a faint light above the basketball hoop. The floor was covered in dust. Old sports equipment lay scattered everywhere. The ghost students spread out across the gym silently. Some stood under the basketball hoop. Some sat on the bleachers. One student bounced a basketball slowly. Boom, boom, boom. Each bounce echoed too long. Daniel backed toward the exit. Then he noticed something. A door in the far corner of the gym, slightly open. A red exit sign glowed above it. His heart jumped. A way out. He slowly walked toward it. The other students didn't seem to notice. The basketball kept bouncing behind him. Boom, boom, boom. He reached the door and pushed it open quietly. It led to a narrow maintenance hallway. Pipes ran along the ceiling. A single light flickered. At the end of the hallway, stairs leading outside. Daniel started running. His footsteps echoed loudly now. Halfway down the hallway, the bell rang again. Daniel froze. Recess was over. Behind him, the gym doors slammed open violently. Dozens of footsteps began running into the hallway. Fast. Too fast. The whispers screamed now. Class is back in session. Class is back in session. Class is back in session. Daniel ran toward the stairs. The footsteps behind him got closer. He reached the stairs and burst through the door at the top, but the staircase didn't lead outside. It led back to the third-floor hallway, the same hallway as before. The classroom door stood open, waiting for him. The teacher stood inside, smiling. Every ghost student was already back at their desks, except one empty seat, Daniel's seat. The teacher slowly checked the clock on the wall. "You are 3 seconds late." Daniel backed away slowly. The hallway behind him grew darker. Shapes moved inside the shadows between the lockers. Hands began pushing through the locker vents from the inside. Pale fingers reaching out, scratching, grabbing. The teacher spoke one last time. "Late students." The locker doors burst open all at once. Dozens of shadowy figures crawled out from inside them. "Join the hallway," Daniel screamed as the shadows rushed toward him, and inside the classroom. The bell rang again. Daniel turned and ran. The shadows spilling from the lockers rushed behind him, their long fingers scraping the floor. The teacher didn't chase him. She simply stood in the doorway of the classroom, smiling calmly while the bell continued ringing somewhere deep inside the building. Daniel sprinted down the hallway, but something was wrong. The corridor stretched longer with every step. The ceiling lights flickered one by one, turning off behind him. Darkness swallowed the hallway piece by piece. The whispers followed. Late, late, late. Daniel reached the stairwell and slammed the door open. He rushed down the steps 2 at a time. First floor, then the second floor, then the first floor again. He stopped suddenly, his chest heaving. The sign on the wall clearly said 3rd floor. "No, no," Daniel whispered. The building had trapped him. The bell rang again. This time it sounded slower, heavier, like something massive was pulling the rope. From the stairwell above him came footsteps, slow, patient. Step, crack, step, crack. The teacher was coming. Daniel burst through the stairwell door back into the hallway. The lockers on this floor were different. Older, rusted. Some had claw marks across the metal. A faint blue light flickered from one locker at the end of the corridor. Daniel slowly walked toward it. Inside, he could hear breathing. Weak, shaky breathing. He pulled the locker door open. A boy sat curled inside. Unlike the others, his eyes weren't black. They were normal, terrified. "You're alive?" Daniel whispered. The boy nodded quickly. "Not for long if she finds you." "The teacher?" The boy nodded again. "She keeps us here until we stop trying to leave." Daniel helped him out of the locker. "How long have you been here?" The boy looked down the hallway nervously. "Time doesn't work here. Maybe hours, maybe years." The footsteps in the stairwell grew louder. Step, crack, step, crack. The boy grabbed Daniel's sleeve. "We have to get to the boiler room." "Why?" "It's the only place she doesn't go." They began running down the hallway together. The lights flickered violently now. Some lockers burst open as they passed, skeletal hands reaching out before snapping back inside. The whispers were screaming now. "Class is starting. Class is starting." They reached the end of the hallway and pushed through a heavy metal door. The staircase behind it led deep underground. The air became warmer as they descended. The bell sound faded slightly. At the bottom was a dark room filled with old pipes and a massive rusted boiler. Steam hissed quietly from the valves. The boy collapsed against the wall, breathing heavily. "She hates this place," he said. "Too much heat." Daniel leaned against the boiler. "Then we're safe." For a moment, everything was silent. Then something tapped the metal pipe above them. Tap. Daniel looked up. Another tap echoed from deeper in the pipes. Tap, tap, tap. The boy's face turned pale. "That's not the teacher." The tapping grew louder. Something was moving through the pipes, crawling through them. The metal began shaking. Steam burst from one of the valves with a loud scream. Then the bell rang again. But now it sounded like it was coming from inside the boiler room. The heavy door behind them slowly creaked open. The teacher stepped inside. Her twisted neck bent further than before, her head hanging slightly to the side. She smiled wider than any human should. "Recess is over." Daniel grabbed a metal pipe from the floor. "Stay back." The teacher didn't stop walking. The pipes above them suddenly burst open. Dark shapes poured out. Thin, ghostly students crawling across the ceiling like spiders. The boy screamed. The teacher raised her hand calmly. "Return to class." Instantly, the crawling figures dropped to the floor and surrounded Daniel and the boy. The teacher looked pleased. "Detention continues." The bell stopped ringing. The classroom door upstairs slammed shut on its own, and in the boiler room, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the boiler room. For a few seconds, Daniel couldn't see anything at all. The only sounds were the hissing pipes and the slow dripping of water from the ceiling. Then something moved. A faint blue glow appeared across the room. One by one, the ghostly students' eyes began to glow in the darkness, like dozens of tiny lanterns. They surrounded Daniel and the other boy in a circle. The teacher stepped forward slowly, her broken neck tilting further to the side. "You tried to skip class," she said calmly. Her voice echoed through the pipes. "Skipping class has consequences." Daniel gripped the metal pipe tighter. "Why are you doing this?" he shouted. The teacher's smile faded slightly. For the first time, her face looked angry. "Because class must continue." The pipes above them rattled violently again. Steam burst from a crack and filled the room with a thick white fog. Through the fog, Daniel saw the ghost students moving closer. Their footsteps dragged across the concrete floor like chains. The boy beside him whispered quickly, "Don't let them touch you." "Why?" "Because once they do..." Before he finished, a ghost student lunged forward. Daniel swung the metal pipe as hard as he could. The pipe passed straight through the ghost's body like mist. The student didn't stop. A freezing hand grabbed Daniel's arm. The cold was unbearable. It felt like ice burning under his skin. Daniel screamed and pulled away. The ghost's fingers left frost marks on his sleeve. The teacher clapped her hands once. Instant silence filled the room. "Enough games," she said. "Return them to their seats." The students began walking forward together. Their glowing eyes surrounded Daniel and the other boy completely. The boy panicked and ran toward the door. Two ghosts grabbed him instantly. He screamed, "Help me!" Daniel tried to reach him, but the ghosts dragged the boy across the floor. His hands clawed at the concrete as they pulled him toward the door. "Please," the boy cried. The teacher looked down at him calmly. "Late students belong in the hallway." The ghosts dragged the boy out of the boiler room.
Though no one in Chicago used that name anymore. To the neighbors, it was simply the old apartment on Waverly Street, the one with the bricked windows on the third floor and the flickering hallway lights that no landlord ever quite fixed. It had been built in 1923, when the city was still roaring and men in pressed suits smoked on balconies while orchestras crackled over radios. By 2024, it leaned inward like a tired old man, its bricks sweating in summer and groaning in winter. The elevator hadn't worked since the 80s. The stairwell smelled of rust and wet dust. And in apartment 3B, someone had been murdered. Clara Mendez didn't believe in haunted buildings. She believed in rent control and minding her own business. That was why she signed the lease. The price was impossible to ignore. A one-bedroom in a historic building for half of what her friends were paying. The landlord, Mr. Halpern, had avoided her eyes when handing over the keys. The previous tenant passed unexpectedly, he'd said. Natural causes. Clara hadn't pressed. People died in apartments all the time. Old buildings, old pipes, old hearts. The first night she noticed the smell. Not rot, not mildew. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like pennies left in water. She scrubbed the floors anyway. She bleached the bathroom tiles until her eyes burned. The scent lingered, subtle but constant. On the third day, she found the stain. It was beneath the radiator in the living room, a dark bloom in the hardwood. Someone had tried to sand it down. The wood there was thinner, paler, but at the center remained a shadow the size of a dinner plate. She touched it. The boards were warped. That night, the pipes began knocking at exactly 2:17 a.m. Not random clanging, rhythmic. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling. 3 knocks, like someone asking to come in. Old buildings, she whispered to herself. Old pipes. But the sound didn't travel through the walls. It came from beneath the floor. A week later, she met Mrs. Kessler from 2A on the stairs. The woman's hands trembled as she adjusted her grocery bags. "You're in 3B, she said flatly. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded. Mrs. Kessler's lips pressed into a thin line. You should keep your windows locked. I always do. Even the ones that are bricked. Clara laughed, but the woman didn't. They sealed them after, Mrs. Kessler said. After what? But the old woman had already shuffled downward. That night, 2:17 a.m. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Clara sat up. Stop, she muttered. The knocking ceased. Silence poured into the room, thick and absolute. Then came a dragging sound, directly beneath her bed. Wood scraping wood. She slid out of bed and pressed her ear to the floor. Cold seeped into her skin. For a moment, there was nothing. Then softly, a whisper. Not words, just breath. She jerked back so hard, she hit her head on the nightstand. In the morning, she convinced herself it had been a dream. Stress, moving exhaustion. She made coffee. She avoided looking at the stain. But that evening, she found something new. The radiator had shifted slightly away from the wall. Just an inch. Enough to reveal a thin crack in the plaster. She hadn't moved it. She was sure of that. Kneeling, she pushed it back. It wouldn't budge. The crack widened. Plaster crumbled softly onto the floor. Behind it was darkness and a smell. Stronger now. Metallic. Sweet. Clara grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. She leaned closer to the hole. At first she saw only old brick. Then something pale. Something curved. It took her brain a long, merciful second to understand. Bone. A finger bone wedged between bricks. The nail still attached, yellowed and split. Clara screamed. The police came within 15 minutes. They pulled the radiator free. The wall opened like a wound. Inside was a cavity carved between support beams, and inside that cavity was what remained of a man. He had been folded into the space, knees forced to chest, jaw hanging open as if mid-sentence. The detective on scene, Ramirez, spoke gently. You didn't know, he assured her. Clara nodded numbly, but she hadn't told him about the knocking. Forensics determined the body had been there for years, at least 6. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull. The killer had never been caught. The previous tenant had not died of natural causes. His name had been Daniel Vale. He had been 32, a freelance photographer. Reported missing. No family in the city. No one pushed hard enough. Clara moved into a hotel while the investigation reopened, but nothing came of it. No fingerprints survived. No new leads surfaced. Eventually, she returned to 3B. She told herself the worst was over. The body was gone. The wall repaired. The stain replaced with new boards. And yet the smell remained. Fainter, but present. The first night back, she slept with the lights on. 2:17 a.m. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Clara's eyes snapped open. He's not here anymore, she whispered. Silence. Then, slowly, her bedroom door creaked open. She had locked it. She was certain. The hallway beyond was dark. She reached for her phone. The 2:17 glowed on the screen. From the living room came a soft thud, like a body hitting the floor. It's just memory, she breathed. Just old sounds. She stepped into the hallway. The air was colder. Each step toward the living room felt heavier, as though the apartment resisted her movement. The new boards near the radiator gleamed under moonlight, unmarked, perfect. Then they began to darken, a spot forming at the center, spreading outward in a slow, blooming stain. Wet, fresh. Clara staggered back. No, she whispered. The stain pulsed. Once. Twice. Then from beneath the boards came a voice. Clear this time. Hoarse. lights went out. Total darkness swallowed the room. Clara's breath came in sharp gasps. "Who?" she choked. A shape rose from the floor, not climbing, emerging as if the wood were liquid. A man unfolded himself onto the living room boards, his limbs bent at wrong angles, his skull caved slightly on one side. Daniel Vale's empty eyes fixed on her. "He never left," the corpse rasped. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside her apartment. Slow, measured. Clara turned toward the door. The handle twisted gently. Once, twice. A key slid into the lock. She hadn't given anyone a key. The door opened. Mr. Halpern stood there, framed by darkness. His expression was not surprised, not confused, just tired. "I told him to leave," he said softly, stepping inside. He wouldn't listen. Clara's gaze flicked to the apparition behind her. He found the old ledgers," Halpern continued. "People don't understand how much these buildings cost to maintain. Sometimes tenants fall behind." Daniel's broken jaw worked silently. "You killed him," Clara breathed. Halpern's eyes shifted past her. He could see it too. His face paled. "No," he whispered. "No, you're gone." Daniel began crawling toward him, joints cracking like snapping twigs. "You sealed the windows," Clara said, backing away. "You hid him in the wall." "It was an accident," Halpern insisted, voice shaking now. "He slipped, hit his head. I panicked." The corpse reached his feet. Bony fingers wrapped around Halpern's ankle. The landlord screamed as the floorboards softened beneath him like wet cement. He clawed at the doorway, splinters digging into his nails. "Help me," he shrieked. Clara couldn't move. Daniel's hollow gaze never left her as Halpern's body sank slowly into the wood. Inch by inch, his screams muffled as the boards closed over his mouth, his nose, his eyes. The apartment fell silent. The lights flickered back on. The stain was gone. The floor pristine. Daniel stood once more in the center of the room, whole now, skull unbroken, eyes almost gentle. "Thank you," he said. Then he dissolved into dust that smelled faintly of pennies and old rain. The next morning, the police found no sign of Mr. Halpern. No forced entry, no disturbance. Clara moved out that day. She didn't tell anyone what she'd seen. The building was sold within the month to a development company. Renovations began. Workers gutted 3B entirely. When they tore up the living room floor, they found nothing. No blood, no body. But deep in the subfloor, carved into a support beam, were 3 words etched over and over again. "He's still here." And every night since the renovation began, at exactly 2:17 a.m., 3 knocks echo through the hollow bones of the Marrowick residences, waiting for someone new to listen. The construction crew lasted 9 nights. On the 10th, only their tools remained. It started small, a misplaced hammer, a radio that turned itself to static at exactly 2:17 a.m. Then came the knocking. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. The workers laughed it off the first time. "Old pipes," they said, even though the plumbing had been ripped out days earlier. On the 4th night, a man named Curtis swore he saw someone standing inside the bricked window of 3B. Not outside, inside the bricks. A face pressed between mortar lines, skin flattened like clay, eyes wide and unblinking. The others told him to get some sleep. On the 6th night, the fresh drywall in the living room began to bulge inward as if something behind it were breathing. They cut it open. Nothing but insulation and beams. By the 9th night, no one would enter the unit alone. They worked in pairs, backs to each other, tools clutched tight. 2:17 a.m., the lights failed across the entire building. Not just 3B, all 4 floors. The generator downstairs never engaged. In the pitch dark, the knocking came again. Not from beneath the floor this time, from inside the walls, surrounding them. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Curtis started screaming before anyone else saw it. The floor in the living room darkened, just like before. A stain blooming through brand new hardwood. Wet, spreading fast. The men stumbled back toward the hallway, but the corridor seemed longer than it had been moments earlier. Stretching, the exit sign flickered red, then black. Something moved beneath the stain. A hand pressed upward from under the boards, fingers splaying, wood bending like skin. The foreman dropped his flashlight. The beam rolled across the floor and landed on a shape standing in the kitchen doorway. A man in outdated clothes, collar stained dark, skull slightly caved on one side. But he wasn't alone. Figures crowded behind him, half formed in shadow. A woman clutching her throat. A teenage boy with bruises circling his neck. An elderly man whose jaw hung loose. Their eyes were empty. Their mouths moved without sound. The foreman backed into the wall. "We didn't do anything," he whispered. The first figure, Daniel, tilted his head slowly. Then, in a voice layered with many others, he spoke. He never worked alone. The bricked windows began to crack from the inside. Mortar splitting, dust raining down. The walls shuddered as though the building itself were trying to cough something up. One of the workers bolted toward the stairwell. He never reached it. The hallway floor softened beneath his boots, swallowing him to the waist. He clawed at the carpet as it liquefied around his fingers. The others ran the opposite direction, back into 3B. The worst possible choice. The apartment door slammed shut behind them. The handle twisted violently, though no hand touched it. The figures in the kitchen began to step forward one by one, their feet never quite touching the floor. Curtis fell to his knees. "What do you want?" he sobbed. Daniel's broken skull shifted, bone knitting and splitting in the same motion. "Witness," the layered voices answered. The bricked window finally burst inward, but there was no outside beyond it. Only darkness, endless and thick like tar. A wind howled through the opening, carrying the metallic scent of old blood. The figures advanced. When the police arrived the next morning, called by a neighbor complaining of structural noises, they found the building silent, abandoned, tools scattered, coffee still warm in thermoses, no workers, no signs of struggle. 3B stood gutted to its beams. The floorboards were unfinished, raw wood stretching wall to wall. And at the center of the living room lay a dark, wet stain the size of a dinner plate. It hadn't been there the day before. The city condemned the building within a week. Too unstable, they said. Unsafe foundation. Demolition was scheduled for early October. The wrecking crew arrived under gray skies. The operator of the excavator, a woman named Elise, had worked on dozens of teardowns. She'd seen houses collapse like sand castles. Nothing unsettled her. She positioned the claw against the roof of the Marwick residences and pulled. The first section tore away easily. Brick and timber crumbled inward with a thunderous groan. Dust plumed into the air. On her second pass, the claw snagged something in the upper floors. Resistance. She adjusted, pulled harder. The machine shuddered. From somewhere within the collapsing building came a hollow knock. 3 times. she heard it. She froze. The claw remained embedded in what had once been 3B. The knocking came again. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Elise killed the engine. Silence settled over the site. The crew stared up at the half-demolished structure. A section of interior wall still stood exposed. On it, beneath layers of old paint and plaster, words were visible. Hundreds of them. Written over decades in different shades, different handwritings. He's still here. Elise swallowed. Finish it, the site manager barked. She restarted the engine. The claw pulled free. The remaining floors gave way in a violent cascade. The building folded into itself, collapsing with a roar that shook nearby windows. Dust swallowed everything. When it cleared, nothing remained but rubble. The lot sat empty by winter. Snow covered the broken foundation. Developers stalled on rebuilding after investors pulled out, whispering about lawsuits, disappearances, bad luck. Months passed. Spring rain pooled in the cracked concrete. Weeds pushed through debris. At night, the lot was silent, empty, except at 2:17 a.m. That was when the ground shifted, subtle at first, a tremor beneath the soil. Then came the sound, faint but unmistakable. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Residents of neighboring buildings began reporting it. A rhythmic tapping beneath their floors. The same time, always the same pattern. The city sent inspectors. They found nothing. No underground pipes. No construction remnants that could explain it. One night, a security guard patrolling the fenced-off lot heard something different. Not knocking. Breathing. He shone his flashlight across the empty ground. The beam caught on something pale protruding from the dirt. A shape like fingers. He approached slowly. The soil shifted. The fingers flexed. He stumbled back, tripping over broken concrete. The ground in the center of the lot darkened, dampening as though soaked from below. The metallic scent rose again, stronger than ever. The earth split with a wet crack. A hand burst upward, clawing at open air. Then another, then many. Dozens of hands tearing through soil, grasping, reaching. The security guard ran. He didn't look back. By morning, the lot was smooth again, undisturbed. No footprints, no holes. Only a faint, circular stain in the center where grass refused to grow. The city eventually paved it over, turning the space into a small parking area. Fresh asphalt, clean lines, bright white paint. People parked their cars without thinking twice. But sometimes drivers returning late at night swear their tires dip slightly in the center space, as if the ground beneath is softer there, as if something below presses upward, testing the surface. And every night, beneath layers of soil, concrete, and asphalt, at exactly 2:17 a.m., the knocking continues. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Waiting. For years, nothing else happened. The lot remained ordinary by daylight. Sedans, oil stains, shopping carts abandoned at its edges. Children cut across it on their way to school. Delivery drivers smoked in the far corner. The city forgot what had stood there. But the sound never stopped. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. At 2:17 a.m., without fail. People who lived nearby began waking at that exact minute, hearts racing for no reason they could name. Pets refused to cross the center parking space. Car alarms sometimes chirped once, just once, at 2:17, then fell silent. No pattern the authorities could trace, no cause they could record. 20 years passed. The neighborhood changed, old brick walk-ups were replaced by glass-front condos. Cafes bloomed on corners. Property values climbed. Eventually, a development firm purchased the parking lot with plans for a 12-story luxury complex. They called it the Waverly Heights. Construction began in spring. The first week was uneventful. Surveyors mapped the ground. Crews drilled test shafts. On the seventh night, the night crew reported a strange vibration in their equipment at 2:17 a.m. The foreman blamed faulty calibration. On the ninth night, a drilling rig punched deeper than intended and struck empty space where solid earth should have been. The drill dropped suddenly, plunging several feet before jamming. When they pulled it up, the metal bit was slick with a dark residue that smelled faintly metallic. Lab results later described it as organic contamination, though no one could identify its source. Work continued. Money was already invested. Deadlines loomed. On the 15th night, a security camera mounted on a temporary light pole recorded something unusual. At 2:16 a.m., the asphalt in the center of the lot developed a hairline crack. At 2:17 precisely, the crack widened in 3 sharp jolts, as though struck from below. 3 impacts. The footage glitched. Static swallowed the frame for 12 seconds. When the image returned, the asphalt was smooth again. The camera itself had rotated slightly, angled downward toward the ground. No one remembered adjusting it. They blamed vandals, teenagers, faulty wiring. By the time excavation began in earnest, the asphalt was peeled back and hauled away. The first scoop of earth exposed soil darker than it should have been. Moist despite weeks without rain. Workers joked about building over a swamp. They dug deeper. At 12 feet, they hit something that stopped the excavator cold. Not rock, not concrete. Something fibrous. The operator climbed down to inspect it. Tangled within the soil were strands resembling roots, but pale, almost white, and thicker than any tree should produce. They pulsed faintly in the light. He reached out with a gloved hand and touched one. It twitched. He recoiled. The strands withdrew slowly into the dirt like worms retreating from sun. Word spread across the site. The project manager insisted it was natural root growth from long-removed trees. "Keep digging," she ordered. The next morning, the hole had filled itself halfway. Not with loose soil fallen from the sides, but compacted earth, smooth and level, as if packed deliberately. There were no signs of intrusion, no footprints, no equipment tracks, just filled ground where emptiness had been. They dug again, this time faster. By evening, they reached nearly 20 feet, and there, embedded vertically in the wall of the pit, they found wood, a beam, old, darkened with age. Carved into it were faint letters. "He's still here." The same phrase repeated over and over, the grooves filled with hardened residue the color of dried blood. The project manager felt her throat tighten. "It's leftover foundation," she said, "from the old building." But the old building had never extended that deep. City records confirmed it. Still, she ordered the beam removed. Workers attached chains and pulled. The wood resisted, not because it was heavy, because it seemed anchored to something below. When it finally tore free, the ground trembled violently. Not an earthquake, a localized shudder, centered entirely within the pit. And then, unmistakable in the sudden hush, came the sound. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Every worker froze. The knocking came again, this time from all around them, masses. They wrapped around equipment, around boots, around wrists. Screams split the air. One man was yanked downward as the earth beneath him liquefied. Another tried to climb the ladder out of the pit, only for the rungs to bend and soften under his grip. The project manager stumbled back from the edge, watching in horror as the pit seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like a lung. And from its depths rose a smell she had never encountered, but somehow recognized. Old blood, long buried. The knocking grew louder, no longer distant, now directly beneath her feet. The ground at the edge of the excavation cracked open. A hand shot upward, grasping at open air. Then another. Then dozens. Pale, dirt-packed hands clawing their way from beneath the city. Faces followed, not decomposed, not skeletal, perfectly preserved, eyes wide with a terror that had never faded. Daniel stood among them, no longer broken, whole, calm. He looked up at the project manager with an expression that was neither angry nor forgiving, only patient. "You built over us," he said softly. His voice carried without shouting, echoing through the construction site. "You always build over us." The pale strands writhed faster, wrapping around steel beams and snapping them like twigs. The half-dug foundation collapsed inward, as if swallowed by an unseen mouth. Workers fled in every direction, abandoning machines, helmets, everything. The project manager ran until her lungs burned, until the site was nothing but a distant cloud of dust behind her. When she finally dared to look back, the pit was gone. The ground lay smooth, undisturbed, as though excavation had never begun. No machinery, no debris, no sign that dozens of people had been working there moments before. Only a flat expanse of dark soil. Authorities arrived to find an empty lot and a missing crew. Surveillance footage from surrounding streets showed workers running, but once they crossed the sidewalk bordering the lot, they simply vanished from view, as if stepping behind an invisible curtain. The city sealed the area permanently after that. High fencing, concrete barriers, official statements about unstable ground conditions. People stopped asking questions. Decades later, the land remains empty. No one attempts to build there anymore. Grass won't grow in the center. Rainwater gathers but never reflects the sky properly, its surface always slightly disturbed, as though something beneath shifts restlessly. And if you stand close enough at 2:17 a.m., pressing your ear to the earth, you can hear it clearly. Not angry, not frantic, just steady. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Waiting for someone to answer.